Today marks our second day of Baltimore Civil Rights Week, a week long opportunity allowing us to place the spotlight on issues important to the city of Baltimore and our citizens, especially those who need greater access to information and resources, not only to maintain, but also to prosper. There is no coincidence that we are almost 4 days away from the anniversary of the historic March on Washington, where the unforgettable Dr. Martin Luther King delivered his I Have a Dream speech. 57 years later, that speech still resonates as a reminder that despite the progress made, much work remains, and the divide among races and other dimensions of equity are still apparent in the face of structural, systemic, and individual discrimination, the legacies of which have transferred from generation to generation. Among Dr. King's many poignant lines is one that squares up with what we intend to accomplish today. And that line is, quote, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter," unquote. To all of our participants on the panel today, we know that equity matters to you. Thank you for your vision and your voice. Central to any change, any progress in the housing arena is the work of Baltimore's Office of Housing and Community Development. I am delighted to introduce you to the Ohio native Alice Kennedy, whom is now Acting Commissioner, Housing and Community Development. Ms. Kennedy joined Housing in 2016 as Deputy Commissioner, Home Ownership and Housing Preservation, and she has a wide array of skills in her housing portfolio, especially citizen-focused best practices and strategies. And I cannot overemphasize the importance of the voice of the citizen as we address many of our challenges. Ms. Kennedy will bring greetings to everyone on behalf of the Mayor and City of Baltimore. Thank you, Ms. Kennedy, for joining us this afternoon, this evening.
Thank you, Linda, for the introduction. Good evening, afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's good to have everybody here in this virtual platform that we're all living in these days. I want to welcome you all and thank you for taking part in this discussion concerning fair housing funding and equity issues. I do bring greetings on behalf of Mayor Young and his administration, and we are especially pleased that this discussion is taking place during our city's Civil Rights Week, and that today we are in day 2 of that with many different very important discussions happening here, and of the important work that needs to be done that Linda touched on some in her opening remarks as well. The Office of Equity and Civil Rights has worked diligently to bring all of us together tonight for this important discussion. The panel that we have for you this evening is a distinguished panel of guests that I am sure will provide important information and spark important discussion and dialogue to happen. Many of you on the panel, as well as many of you who are watching and listening this evening, have worked alongside the city and the Department of Housing and Community Development in the interest of equitable community development. I can't emphasize enough, as Linda emphasized as well, the importance of community and the community voice as we look to creating equitable community development opportunities and sustainable and thriving neighborhoods across the city with affordable and safe housing opportunities. We, as a city and DHCD, we've made significant and strategic investments in affordable housing, as well as home ownership support, specifically for affordable housing, as well as supporting our legacy homeowners and the value that our legacy homeowners bring to our neighborhoods and our communities. Affordable housing and homeownership support has been a critical priority for us, as well as our partners and many of you here this evening that are joining us on this virtual platform. The work to eliminate barriers still faces many long-standing systemic challenges that we all are aware of. Challenges that discussions like we will be having this evening will help break down and find the right paths to bring about real and sustainable change for our communities and our neighborhoods across the city. So again, I want to take time to thank you all for asking me on behalf of the mayor to bring greetings this evening, and also for taking the time to engage here this evening and to be a part of this tremendously important discussion and being committed to this effort. I am an Ohio native, but I've been in Baltimore for over 25 years now, and my mom grew up here, and I went to college here, and this is home. So I don't want that Ohio native component to drown out the fact that Baltimore is an amazing, special place, and I am excited to be here. I'm excited to be serving as acting commissioner, and I'm excited to listen to the discussion that we have here today. So thank you again, and thank you all for taking the time, and I look forward to hearing the discussion and the panelists as we move forward this evening.
Thank you, Acting Commissioner Kennedy, for your leadership in this area. I am now honored to introduce the Acting Comptroller of the Currency, Brian P. Brooks, a Harvard-trained lawyer whom serves as the chairman of our nation's preeminent regulatory banking agency. Mr. Brooks is administrator of the federal banking system and chief officer of the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, and also a director of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation and member of the Financial Stability Oversight Council. Now, what this means in short is that he ensures supervision of the 1,200 national banks and federal savings associations and federal branches and agencies of foreign banks that conduct 70% of all banking business in the US. Now, how about that for the number of zeros that follow that total? Prior to becoming acting comptroller, Mr. Brooks served as senior deputy comptroller and chief operating officer at OCC, providing oversight for OCC's bank supervision policy, economics, supervisory system and analytical support, systemic risk identification support, and specialty supervision and innovation. He also served as a member of the OCC's executive committee and was on the chair of the Technology Systems Subcommittee since joining the agency in April 2020. His extensive and professional portfolio includes his service as Chief Legal Officer of Coinbase Global Inc., which serves 20 million customers, Executive Vice President, General Counsel, and Corporate Secretary of the 3.2 trillion Fannie Mae, Vice Chairman of One West Bank NA, and Managing Partner of the Washington, D.C. office of the global law firm Olvany and Myers, LLP, where he also served as chair of the firm's financial services practice group. As impressive as these qualifications are, and what makes him more of a standout gentleman is his leadership and personal commitment to such professional, charitable, and community development organizations as the Housing Policy Council and the Appleseed Foundation, which has as its core mission equity, social justice, and a commitment to helping low-income people and working families build better lives and eliminating structural barriers at their root cause. Having read his bio, I now understand how he is able to accomplish all of this. You see, at the end of a busy day, in addition to being a husband and a father, Mr. Brooks can simply drift to Mozart or Chopin, as he is also an accomplished classical pianist and keyboard player in a DC area classic rock cover band. Today, Mr. Brooks joins us to share with us an exciting and substantial cross-cutting initiative that is linked to our discussion of equity and fair housing. Mr. Brooks, we thank you for joining us this evening. We welcome you, and we thank Raphael DeLeon for facilitating your support of Baltimore's Civil Rights Week virtual symposium.
Well, Linda, that is literally the nicest introduction I've ever had in my entire career. I'm almost embarrassed to say anything else other than that, except you are definitely invited to my next band gig. So let's plan on that, okay?
Absolutely.
Listen, these are not laughing times. These are challenging times we're living in right now, and we need to move quickly, and we need to seize the moment to do some important things. So I want to talk about a project that we put together at the OCC that we call Project Reach, and I'm going to come to that in a moment. But because this is Baltimore Civil Rights Week in particular, I want to tell you a story about one of the very first times I realized that there is such a thing as structural inequity. And I emphasize the word structural because not all inequity is structural. Some people are just mean. Some people are individually racist. Some people are biased in various ways. And those probably aren't structural. Those are just flaws of human beings. And yet there actually are structures out there that are problems. And one of the earliest times I realized that was when I was general counsel of Fannie Mae and we were coming out of the financial crisis. As you know, there had been literally millions of foreclosures in the United States. And, there were two sides of the foreclosure situation. There were the families that were caught up in foreclosures who lost their homes, in various different circumstances. And that was tragedy enough. But then there was the other side of foreclosures, which is once those houses had been vacated by those families, what happened to them? And that was when I first made a study of Baltimore and the Baltimore housing market. So it turns out that years after the financial crisis in Baltimore, there were literally thousands. At one time, I want to say the number was between 18 and 20,000 foreclosed properties in the city of Baltimore that were owned by Fannie Mae that had not been sold to new families for years. They sat vacant for years. And the reason was because there were rules in place at the time that said that you couldn't sell a foreclosed property for less than the unpaid principal balance of the loan that had defaulted and led to the foreclosure. Let's just think about that for a moment. The loan went to foreclosure because somebody who lived in it couldn't sell it. And so it was by definition worth less than the amount of the loan balance. And yet the bank rules were that you couldn't sell the foreclosed property to a new family for less than the unpaid principal balance, which was more than the house was worth. So the result of that for years and years was blighted neighborhoods, boarded up windows, vacant properties that sat there forever. That's a structure. The rule that says you can't sell the property for less than the unpaid loan balance, that's a structure. And so the great thing about where I sit today is I actually have some amount of control over those structures because I get to help decide what the rules are going to be. And so what I want to tell you about in Project Reach are some of the structures we're trying to fix and some of the barriers we're trying to tear down that will help people in places like Baltimore build wealth, advance their financial lives, and better themselves in society and the world, okay? So, Project Reach. We had the idea for Project Reach, Linda, just a couple of months ago, maybe 3 months ago now, when the George Floyd protests were proving themselves to be much more than protests over one tragic murder. Those protests turned out to be a social justice movement built up around the idea that groups of people, particularly but not only African Americans, have been left out for way too long because of these structures. And as I watched these protest marches go down 16th Street, not very far from my house, night after night, and every day the call was the same, which is for structural equity, I started asking myself, should we take seriously the idea that it's not just that Black people are poorer on average than white people? Should we take seriously the idea that in fact structural barriers are preventing them from generating wealth the same way that other groups have over the decades? And that made me think, well, what could those structures possibly be? What are the reasons why white people and Asian Americans tend to have more wealth than Black people and Hispanics? So I started looking into this, and I identified 2 or 3 things that I think are very real issues. One of them is another rule we have in our society is you can't buy a house without a credit score. And it turns out 45 million Americans don't have credit scores, and those 45 million Americans are much more heavily minority than the population at large. So that rule that is keeping people out might be a structure. So then I dug a little deeper into this issue, and I looked at the racial wealth gap in America, where the average African American household has a net worth of about $5,000, and the average white household has an average net worth of about $170,000. And that gap, 5,000 versus 170,000, is almost entirely explained by the average price of a single family house. So that's what then convinced me we've got a problem with credit scores, because without a credit score, you can't buy a house. And without a house, you have a racial wealth gap of $165,000. So we've got to fix that. So we dug deeply into this problem. I assembled a group of people that included major civil rights leaders, such as Derek Johnson of the NAACP and Mayor Mark Morial of the National Urban League. I sat down with the CEOs of some of our biggest banks, and I sat down with the heads of some of the buzziest Silicon Valley tech companies. And I said, listen, we've got to solve a problem that's bedeviled this country for 30 years, the problem of no credit scores. We need to take poor people and minority people who cannot build wealth through home ownership, and we need to give them a credit score so they can come into the system. What do we do? And after a series of meetings, it turns out that although this problem has been with us for many decades, it's not all that hard to solve. The problem is as simple as this. All we're trying to do is predict whether you're going to pay your loan in the future or not. We don't need a credit score, as that was traditionally understood, to do that. All we need is some indication of, have you paid your rent on time? Do I see recurring money coming into your bank account on a regular basis? Do you pay your phone bill and your light bill? If you do those things, I can create a synthetic credit score that's just as predictive about you as somebody else's credit card payments and mortgage payments are. Once I've solved that problem, I've got 45 million excluded Americans who suddenly can be considered for credit. That is a revolution. Now, we haven't built this new credit score yet. We're in the middle of our work, but I'm telling you that by October or November, we're going to be ready to roll this out and accept applications from people who today could never be considered. That is a structural barrier, okay? That's a real structural barrier. Let me give you another example of what we're working on here. So another example is there's a rule that most banks have to observe in this country, which is that you can't make a mortgage to a person who doesn't have a 20% down payment. So again, structures are rules. The 20% down payment requirement, that's a structure. Now that exists for a reason, which is people who have more home equity at risk are less likely to default. So that rule does protect banks in general. And yet, because it takes money to make money, if you're from a race or ethnic group or from a family that did not inherit wealth from your parents or grandparents, it's going to be a lot harder to accumulate a 20% down payment than if you inherited that, right? So how do we fix this? We fix it not by giving people gifts. You know, that's sort of the give a man a fish strategy. That's not very sustainable. It never lasts very long when you try those approaches. But again, I got a bunch of very smart civil rights people, very smart bankers, and some other folks together, and I said there must be a different way, and we hit upon something. We hit upon the idea of, what if we financed houses not through debt, right? Mortgage is a debt that you have to repay. What if we financed houses through equity? So we allowed people to make a small down payment, but instead of borrowing all of the rest of the money and having to repay it, what if a little piece of that capital stack for that house was equity? In other words, what if someone gave you the money and didn't expect monthly payments? They just said, listen, if you sell the house in the future and you make a profit, we'll get repaid out of the profits, but you don't owe us anything other than that. Well, we think that that means that people are going to be much less risky than normal low down payment loans, and yet will create much more access if we allow them to put a smaller amount down through what we call soft second mortgages, which are basically equity rather than debt. Imagine if we could solve the debt trap through this new structure that we've built. That's another major Project Reach initiative. And the last thing we're going to do, and this may be a little bit mind-bending, so just bear with me for a minute. But the last thing we're going to do is we're going to solve what I call the trust problem in banking, which is really specific to certain minority groups in our country. So it turns out, and this will not come as a surprise to many of your viewers, it turns out that people in this country, disproportionately racial and ethnic minorities, actually get scammed. They get scammed every day. Sometimes they're getting scammed by payday lenders, sometimes by buy here, pay here car dealers, sometimes by banks. And as a result, minorities tend to trust institutions even less than non-minorities do in this country. And that plays out in ways that are really pernicious. So the way that grabbed my attention in Project Reach is the fact that there are an enormous number of people in our country who are still paying 7% interest on their mortgages at a time when the market rate is 3%. Why would that be? Why are they throwing all that money away on interest that they don't need to be paying? It's because, in part, when they get refinance solicitations in the mail or over the phone, they think somebody's trying to scam them. And it's possible that they are, but it's also possible we just have a trust problem in this country. And that brings me to the third pillar of Project Reach, which is all about revitalizing the role that minority-owned deposit institutions play in our banking system. So minority deposit institutions used to be many all around the country, but as of 2020, they have really waned. In the entire OCC system, there are only 5 African-American banks in the United States, okay? And only something like 26 MDIs overall, some very small number. This is a problem because minority deposit institutions enjoy a trust level in minority communities that the big banks will never enjoy. And that's because the leaders and the owners and the executives are people who come out of those communities. And so I envision a world where we revitalize minority deposit institutions as the tip of the spear in delivering the kinds of better financial solutions to minorities that they can trust. And what we're going to do inside of Project Reach to achieve that result is we're asking our participating big banks not just to make equity investments in MDIs, but also to provide management training and executive rotation programs and strategy advice, almost on sort of a big brother, big sister basis, to make these MDIs not just exist, but make them successful. And when we do that, I believe we're not going to just solve the problem of the MDI employees. I think we're going to change the relationship of banks to minority communities. And if we start at the grassroots, if we can build trust at that level, and if we can help use that trust to build wealth among our poorest citizens and among our minority residents in cities like Baltimore, then we will have changed the world. So I've got a lot to do, Linda. You correctly point out there are a lot of zeros I got to deal with every day, and yet there's nothing more important I'm working on than this. So I just want to say it's a real honor to be part of what you're doing today. Baltimore is ground zero in the fight for civil rights, and economic rights are civil rights. We're going to do our part in the banking system to make a difference here and move the needle. And I'll just conclude by saying what I've said to everyone who's heard me say this. Don't judge me based on my words, judge me based on the results that we will start delivering this fall. Linda, congratulations on a great program. I want to say thanks to all of your viewers. Best wishes for an amazing program. You're doing very important work, and it's an honor to be here. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brooks. Am I on? Thank you so much, Mr. Brooks, for sharing your important initiative and your straightforward illustration of how structural inequities in the banking and lending institution can affect the choices for underserved communities. It is just overwhelmingly refreshing to hear a leader at your level speak so clearly, personally, and intelligently on this topic. And we look forward here in Baltimore to working further with the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency to change the landscape for not only African Americans, but for the underserved in general. Now, for those whom have questions for Comptroller Brooks, we ask that you please include them in the chat room, and we will prepare a list for Mr. Raphael DeLeon to get back to the Comptroller of the currency. Permit me to just conclude on Mr. Brooks's most significant and substantive presentation by saying, Mr. Brooks, you rock on so many levels, and that is important to everyone who has not only had the opportunity to listen in today, but who will have the opportunity to listen in on the future and benefit from the changes that your leadership is implementing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda.
Absolutely. Most of you are already aware that Baltimore's Equity Ordinance 18-160, almost 2 years old, tells Baltimore as a municipality to examine and correct institutional and structural racism and other forms of discrimination and inequities within local government, and to put in place structures and resources to address existing inequities. Across Baltimore City, agencies have appointed equity professionals to oversee this work, and as their work evolves, the city has already undertaken numerous efforts to assist those in need, and further work already underway to dismantle the systems and structures that perpetuate inequities. Let's be clear, the enactment of this ordinance does not mean that agencies have not put in prior work in this area, but what it does mean is that overall, the story the data tells us is that there are still a myriad of factors, economically driven in most instances, as Comptroller Brooks so succinctly just pointed out, that point to distinctions between groups and limited evolutionary progress in the area of equity, social justice, and economics. We have much more work to do, and that is why we must avail ourselves of every opportunity to foster accountability. And again, Comptroller Brooks' example is a clear example of leadership accountability to combat injustice and to further collaborations that will yield progress and promote equity as a precursor to equality. I am glad to be able to help advance this cause. Yet we must look more deeply. We must ask the hard questions, look at the root causes of inequities, and never, ever make excuses for those who dismiss or marginalize the importance of the work before us and the legacy from which it stems. Baltimore, the time is now. And what fuels my optimism is the opportunity to be in the company this evening of champions, ambassadors for change, like all of you. The prominent scholars, practitioners, and leaders with us this evening have moved beyond ideas to tried and tangible results that are bridging divides. And I hope that after today, you will commit to continuing your collaboration with Baltimore on ways to achieve steady progress in this area. I introduce you now to Glenda Curtis, Manager, Culture and Community with the Office of Equity and Civil Rights. Glenda is facilitating a number of cross-cutting community initiatives along with her colleague, Lou Bangura. Ms. Bangura's brainchild for a funding fair in March of this year was set to launch, but interrupted by the pandemic and reinvented in the form of this virtual fair housing funding fair discussion we're having this evening. Thank you, Lou, for that brainchild. Thank you, Glenda, for your work. Glenda, I'm turning it over to you. Thank you for leading this evening's forum.
Thank you so much, Linda, for all of the wonderful things that you've said and for rounding out what the office is doing and what we're specifically doing for Civil Rights Week 2020. We have a great lineup of panelists who will give you an overview of their work and how it ties into the work of civil rights. And they are adequately prepared to take questions. And we ask that if you do have questions that you put them in a chat and we will appropriately direct those questions. Without further ado, I will introduce you to Ms. Morgan Rouse. Morgan Rouse joined Innovative Housing Institute in the spring of 2018 as the program manager for the Bailey Consent Decree. She comes to Innovative Housing Institute from Catholic Charities, where she managed a staff of 5 full-time case managers at My Sister's Place. Ms. Rouse has worked with hundreds of underprivileged clients while also participating in policy and program development. Ms. Rouse also worked at Penrose Properties in Philadelphia as a supportive service coordinator. In addition, she's a former investigator with the City of Baltimore and the Community Relations Office, where she has extensive experience in investigating housing discrimination. She has also extensive background in program management and human services and in the field of homelessness, corrections, and property management. In 2006, Innovative Housing Institute was selected by the Housing Authority of Baltimore to carry out the portion of the remedy that resulted from the Bailey Consent Decree called the Enhanced Leasing Assistance Program, ELAP in short, which provides housing assistance to non-elderly persons with disabilities through the Housing Choice Voucher Program, formerly Section 8. Innovative Housing focuses on its grassroots and community efforts at the local level in Baltimore City and surrounding counties, serving the most vulnerable sector of the population by matching them with housing opportunities. Without further ado, here's Ms. Morgan Rouse.
Hello, hi, good evening. Can everyone hear me? Okay, so Currently, I was at Innovative Housing some years ago. If you are from Baltimore or are familiar with our culture, originally we started back the day before 9/11, actually. And we were charged with the Thompson versus HUD decree, which ultimately led to the demolishment of public housing high-rise, and Innovative Housing partnered with MBQ. I came back 2.5 years ago. New consent decree, which is the Bailey consent decree. We are the major contractor for Housing Authority of Baltimore City. It is our responsibility to assist Housing Authority of Baltimore City with placement of persons that are under 62 with a disability. Not in the tenant-based program, which is the original Section 8, where a client actually received a voucher in a hand, but project-based, where Housing Authority has actually gone out in the community, met with owners, where the subsidy is attached to the unit and not to the person. It is my responsibility, myself and my team, to assist persons with disabilities with leasing, everything from completing the application to touring all available properties to everything you can name, getting an award letter, trying to resolve family issues, linking them with mental health issues. We assist them not only with touring and lease up, we also provide 6 months of post-placement case management, which oftentimes leads to years of case management, but it's okay. I can tell you this, you have people in Baltimore City who are disabled, who actually we tried to link with the Ticket to Work program because they don't want to be on limited income with disability. So a lot of our clients try to seek part-time work through Social Security to supplement their income. Prior to a lot of our clients becoming disabled, they worked all of their lives. We have some gentlemen I've met who used to work at Bethlehem Steel, and for whatever medical reasons, they were unable to work, and of course now they're on disability. We have women who are housekeepers. It just runs the gamut. And these clients, whether they live in public housing for the last 30 years, whether they fell on hard times and had to move with a family member, when it comes time for us to tour them and for them to apply, one of my first questions I asked is, what is your rental history? Even though you are on a voucher, I want you to be confident that you are able to submit your application and you measure up. I have had very few, if any, clients who had poor rental history. And if you can sustain your house, your children, your grandchildren, the village with such little money, then home ownership is not out of reach. You have people who are the working poor. They get up, they go to work every day. But housing in Baltimore City, decent housing, is very, very, very expensive. My almost 10 years at Catholic Charities, you have people who actually go to work every day, who live at the shelter because they just can't afford the $850, $900, $1,200 rent. But if they just had a single small home, $700 mortgage, it would not be an issue. Very few of our clients have issues with gas and electric. The reality is, as was stated, they are afraid of home ownership. There is definitely a mistrust with banks. A lot of the working poor have been through every program you could name. They're trying to be homeowners. And it's always, they go to classes, are made promises, and it just doesn't pan out. So I'm confident, especially with everyone on this call, that this can happen. It's not far reaching, it's not far fetched, it's actually doable. And for those who are not employed, who want to be employed, there are some other things and some other people that we can collaborate with, that we can bring on this fold to give people in Baltimore City access, physical access. Transportation is a barrier. To give them access to the jobs that can actually help them prosper. So the population is there. Nobody wants to live next to abandoned homes. No one wants to know that Miss Johnson used to live next door and she gave up on the city and moved to the county and you're still stuck there. So I'm confident that this team can actually make this happen. But we need to really open people's eyes. It has to be a very strategic plan. We need to bring in some more partners. But it can be done. It can be done. It's not as hard as some people think. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to share. I'm prepared for the task. We need to build trust. Once people have trust, they're willing to take that first step. And the key to it is once we engage, we need to have tangible benchmarks where people can gauge their success, because we don't want to lose people in the process. We want them to be encouraged. We want to hold hand if we have to, but it can be done. It can be done. Anyone else?
Thank you so much, Morgan, for the overview of Innovative Housing Institute. We will now move on to our next panelist, who is Denise Dorsey-Jones. Denise Dorsey-Jones is a proven leader. Denise uses her creativity to resolve problems, mobilization skills to encourage people to action, and her gift to foster e-spirit decor among stakeholders to facilitate the formation of lasting cooperation. Ms. Jones Dorsey, an anti-poverty activist, has a rich background administering and managing human service delivery programs, fighting material poverty. She says, my professional and volunteer life has provided me with the opportunity to contribute to the elimination of societal structures that perpetuate material poverty, undermine family life, and destroy communities. Ms. Jones Dorsey serves as the executive director for My Brother's Keeper, MBK, a non-denominational faith-based community organization located in Irvington, in the Irvington community. My Brother's Keeper's vision is to transform community. In her role as executive director, Ms. Denise Jones Dorsey was responsible for fundraising upwards of $400,000 per year, managing the facility whose appraised value is $1.5 million, and providing leadership to a combination of 35 years staff and volunteers on a weekly basis in order to implement the vision of transformation. Ms. Jones Dorsey served more than 11 years in the administration of former Baltimore Mayor Kurt Smoke. She served as Baltimore's workforce unit manager for the Baltimore Empowerment Zone, working with the community and local businesses to help residents get and retain jobs. I now introduce you to Ms. Denise Jones Dorsey. Ms. Dorsey.
Good evening, everyone. Glenda, thank you for that introduction. I didn't expect for you to share all of that detail, but needless to say, I am continuing, even though in retirement, to do the things that I love, and that is to understand the root causes of material poverty and do all that I need to do to contribute to the change. I am pleased tonight to discuss with this audience the elimination of barriers to home buying. Promoting this panel discussion clearly indicates there are challenges in simply achieving the American dream of home ownership, the same dream that your great-grandparents, grandparents, parents embrace, and possibly you. In the time allotted to me, we will explore the genesis of the barriers and why they persist, and what you can do short-term and long-term to address those barriers. Going all the way back to the settling of this nation, our nation, there was a dream. What was that American dream? North America was settled with one single goal: the provision of the control of land to those who settled it. Significant to land control is power. It's as simple as that: power and land. The persons who came from Europe to settle, in many instances, did not own the land where they lived in Europe. They were serfs, they were peasants, and they wanted an opportunity to change their lives and to build wealth for their families. But not only did they want to build wealth for their families, owning land also provides you with security. Hence, this advocate is very interested in promoting home ownership versus promoting rental housing, because rental housing does not provide you with long-term security. Moving forward in my presentation, I wanted to also share that when these persons came to this nation, because control of the land was so important, in spite of the immense mass of land that existed, they did not find it in themselves to be able to share land with our nation's indigenous people. Our first tragedy and travesty. And to this day, as a nation, we find it difficult to be able to honor the land treaties that we have made with our Native American brothers and sisters. That's a root cause, that's a problem. And it also sets the stage for what happened as we progressed as a nation. What's important is that control of land and owning land was so important that when our nation's documents were created, the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, who would vote and why, let me remind all of you all that the only persons at that time who had the right to vote were white males who owned land. Very significant. So we need to understand that land power was measured in the ability to vote. And I hope everybody is hearing me as we move into this season of voting. Voting rights has been an issue from the very beginning of this nation because voting is really about sharing power. The sacred right to vote is not simply to vote or not to vote is simply a decision to exercise your power, or not to vote means you decide to yield your power to somebody else. Let's talk about this power as it relates to land. Post-Civil War Reconstruction, the value of power continues to be tied to land, and it was recognized in the resulting rejection of the provision of 40 acres and a mule to newly freed persons of African descent. In the beginning of the 20th century, public education is tied to land. The establishment of land-grant colleges, i.e. my alma mater, the University of Maryland, purpose was to teach how to make the land more productive to increase its value. Note, 100% of the land now has been designated for use. There is no more land being created. So control of land, the scarce resource, becomes extremely important. If there is a desire to change, land use has to be acquired lawfully or unlawfully, and therefore we repurpose the use of land. So let me take you to my next point. In addition to public land-grant colleges, the establishment of public grade schools is also based on land, and the amount of money spent by a school district is informed by the property taxes that it collects. Hence, low property taxes, less resources to schools. Immediately following World War I, there is an influx of immigrants seeking the American dream for their families. While they lived in crowded neighborhoods and slum-like conditions, their goal is to earn enough money to purchase a home. Please note that Baltimore is significant in this history because after Ellis Island, Baltimore becomes the #2 large port receiving our brothers and sisters from Europe and other places in the world. Baltimore neighborhoods, as a result, become inundated, and the shrinking available land inside the city proper is designated for our immigrant brothers and sisters. But the hardworking immigrants have money to move out of the city. And at that time, out of the city is west of North Avenue. A developer's dream, but a challenge to the power of politicians, both in the city and in the county. Hence, the strategy to address this is the 1930s Baltimore codifies rules which result in redlining of financially poor communities. Let me be real clear. The redlining strategy at that time was not just for African Americans. It was for various immigrant groups of people. Hence, you began to have what Baltimore calls its city of neighborhoods and its charm. And there is a charm, but I want you all to be clear that each one of those neighborhoods in the classical term became ghettos, not slums, but ghettos where groups of people of the same race, religious background, ethnicity live together. And if you think about it, you can name some of those communities now that continue to persist. What happened though is that with redlining of financially poor neighborhoods, you doom the designated neighborhoods to disinvestment and power challenges. On top of that, so now I'll bring in race. On top of that, racial segregation exacerbates the challenge It is not the sole cause of the black butterfly. So let me be clear again. We are aware that there's a black butterfly in Baltimore proper. Many people want to suggest to you that that came about as a result of racial segregation. I'm here to share with you that it was not only racial segregation, but it was economic disinvestment that reinforces the black butterfly. And it's also economic investment that reinforces the L, the white L. Let's talk a moment, though, about what is structural racism versus prejudice. I was delighted to hear the controller indicate that he had a real grasp of the difference of those two terms, and I want to make sure this audience does as well. Prejudice is simply a prejudgment of one human being by another human being based on a trait or an attribute. This prejudgment is usually learned behavior, not supported by facts or evidence. All human beings are subject to making prejudgments. Racism, however, is the ability to codify prejudgments based on race. Codification allows for behaviors to be exercised whether or not the individual agrees with or embraces the prejudgment. This is key because we have a lot of folks who are listening to this broadcast who in their heart believe that Black lives do matter, do not discriminate against Native Americans, Asian people, women. However, with codification, you have no choice but to participate in a system or rule whose impact adversely impacts the people that you hold in regard. That's very important. Note, racist behaviors may be totally against the will of the person exercising the behavior. Now, let's go to structural racism because this is key. Structural racism is the institutionalized values, outlooks, rules, regulations, and protocol whose result is to trap person or persons inside of outcomes which they and the person implementing them have no control over. I want to repeat that. Structurally racist behavior takes on a life of its own. And what I would like to do is give you an example. One, Comptroller Brian Brooks pointed out his grasp of rules and structures that could easily be dismantled that would allow for more opportunity for working people to purchase their own homes. You heard that earlier in the presentation, but for those who might have missed that presentation, let me just give you a simple example. All of you all are familiar with a gas-driven vehicle known as a car. You know the car moves based on a system of gears and levers that moves the wheels, and the distance of movement is based on gasoline combustion controlled by the engine, correct? This structural system will move in a certain manner regardless of the values and prejudices of the driver. Hence, the outcome is predetermined by the design of the system. The good news is systems can be redesigned to change the outcome. And that's what my talk with you is about tonight. Changing the design around home buying in such a way that more working people can purchase their homes. Again, I was encouraged by the comments that Comptroller Brian Brooks presented to us tonight, which indicated that he had a real grasp of design and how to modify design that had outlived its meaning and purpose. What I'd like to do is share with you some of the historic reasons why my community does not trust And these are the things that happened in the last century that led to the creation of distrust among the African American community, my community. Number one, the codification of racial segregation, where my community was remanded to certain parts of town, strictly based on race. What's interesting is that when we took the lot that was given to us and developed it, like Rosewood, Wilmington, North Carolina, Tulsa, Oklahoma, then we get burned out of our communities. Next instance, the codification of the red line rules, and regrettably, my beloved Baltimore took the lead on providing the model that was then embraced by the rest of the nation. The 30s, the Depression, there was no New Deal for African Americans. Structurally, when we should have benefited from the Social Security program, the program was designed in such a way that agricultural workers and domestic workers were left out. Not understanding that the majority of my community served in those roles at that time. So we're left out structurally out of the New Deal. The war, Second World War. African American men and women went to war alongside their white brothers and sisters. And when they came home, they expected to enjoy the GI Bill. Not so. The African American GIs had difficulty using their benefits associated with their military service. Then in the 50s is blockbusting. 60s, systemic disinvestment. 90s, systemic reinvestment resulting in gentrification. And then last but not least, just before the crash of the 2000s, predatory lending practices. It's important for all of us who are a part of this panel to understand that as we develop policy, that policy needs to be tested in the reality of how people live on the ground to ensure that we are not structurally locking out groups of people. What I'd like to do is at this point, bring my discussion to a pause and talk just for a few minutes about a group that I'm associated with, which is the Northeast Housing Initiative, where a group of community people came together and said, we need to figure out, we the people need to figure out how we can provide housing opportunities, home ownership opportunities to our neighbor. And I'm here to share with you that we as a group, it's been 5 years now, decided and developed a community land trust, which today has 2 houses ready for home ownership, 4 are coming online. We believe that we're providing an example of how you can redesign systems in such a way that folks can purchase their homes. In another conversation, hopefully I'll be invited to talk in great detail about what a community land trust is. But I do want to share with this audience that there is a growing movement in Baltimore for community land trust housing, which provides persons who are 30 to 80% AMI the ability to purchase their homes under a current structure. Now, audience, I could talk all night. Y'all can see I'm getting excited, but that wouldn't be fair to you or the rest of the panelists. So at this point, I'm going to sign off. As was suggested, questions, we'll be happy to answer those questions. Please place them in the chat. And again, I thank the Office of Equity for allowing me this opportunity to present to you tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Denise Jones-Dorsey, for that tremendous history of housing inequity. I could have said a lot more about you, given all of the involvement that you've had in the community and the housing industry, but we'll have a chance to catch up on some more of your work later on in the week, and hopefully to partner with you on some future initiatives. Our next panelist is Mr. Scott Sefrin with Live Baltimore. After spending 10 years in the mortgage industry, Scott decided to join the team at Live Baltimore to help make more of an impact on the Baltimore community. Scott had been a preferred lending partner of Live Baltimore for several years and thoroughly enjoyed the events and workshops, but he wanted to be more involved. Scott realized quickly that saving money for a down payment was the most difficult hurdle to overcome when deciding to purchase a home, and decided to partner with Live Baltimore to educate his customers on the programs that are available in Baltimore. Many of Scott's customers were not able to tap into generational wealth and family members for assistance, which was frustrating as both a loan officer and a customer. Many people with good enough credit for a solid income are still unable to save for a down payment due to numerous other costs and expenses. Scott was and still is very much an advocate for people looking into utilizing down payment assistance when many other loan officers would not spend any time with these customers. Scott realized that he could help more people by joining Live Baltimore team and helping to build relationships with the Live Baltimore and Baltimore's real estate community. As business relationship manager, Scott provides advertising benefits to lenders, real estate agents and developers, title companies, and many others within Baltimore City, and educates 100% of real estate agents through workshops and webinars on many different down payment assistance programs. Scott is proud of the work that Live Baltimore does for the community and is consistently working on new ways to engage real estate community and first-time home buyers. I now introduce to you Mr. Scott Sefrin.
Thank you, Glenda. Appreciate that. So I am actually going to share my screen here. I do have a brief PowerPoint. All right. So, as Glenda had said, I am a former mortgage loan officer. I am now on staff here at Live Baltimore. I do this class in some fashion pretty much every other week. What you're seeing tonight is a condensed version of what we call our 6 o'clock session, where we just host free workshops and education series for any number of home buyers, all sorts of income, all sorts of cultural backgrounds, anybody that is looking to buy a home in Baltimore. We want to talk to them. We want to help them. Live Baltimore's mission is to recruit and retain Baltimore City residents by attracting people to any one of Baltimore's 278 thriving neighborhoods. We also want to help residents find a way to stay in the city. I'm going to talk about that in a second, some of the programs that we have regarding that. And we envision Baltimore as a growing and vibrant city that attracts and retains a diverse population. So that is our mission statement. I do want to take a minute here before I dive into some of the in-depth information about what's out there for home buyers. This section will probably reiterate a lot of the great information that the other panelists have talked about tonight. You're going to hear me repeat a lot of the different things. But on the screen right now is a slide of Baltimore City population all the way from 1950 down to up to 2017. And so I just want to read real quick an actual word for word excerpt from what we put into one of our grant proposals, which kind of explains this chart a little bit. So, Live Baltimore works against the population loss that began in Baltimore in the 1950s. This ongoing loss of residents has hindered the city's ability to support its infrastructure, fund its public schools, and provide adequate services to its citizens. So, in short, we need more taxpayers. The root causes of population loss we've talked about a lot already, and there are many of them. Not all of those are within Live Baltimore's ability to impact, but they include the loss of industrial jobs, which Ms. Denise spoke about, national housing policies, which Mr. Brooks spoke about, racism, classism, suburbanization, the devaluation of homes in majority Black neighborhoods, the cyclical nature of disinvestment, blight, crime, and most importantly, what nobody has actually talked about today is actually the change to the American family size. More recently, Baltimore has struggled to compete with its surrounding counties for three big reasons: higher crime rates, higher property taxes, and lower performing public schools. Like I said, our work at Live Baltimore is to increase the residency. So some of our work will not impact the number of children that people are having nowadays. We mentioned before that this was a very large population of immigrants. The city was the second largest port in the country for a very long time, and that those families had large families. I have a neighbor of mine down the street who was born and raised in his 2-bedroom row house with 16 brothers and sisters. People are just not having as many children right now, which does lead to a population decline. So we're not going to be able to impact that type of thing. But what we can do is create marketing campaigns that support urban communities, support diversity in these communities, support our neighborhoods. So even though racism and classism drove residents from our city in the past, we believe that we can draw new residents by celebrating diversity. And while discriminatory housing practices previously prevented investment in all parts of Baltimore, we believe we can enable renewed vibrancy by empowering homeownership in all communities. Although higher crime rates remain a deterrent for some residents, property tax rates have actually begun to decline for homeowners. Not a lot of people know about that right now. I talk about that on a daily basis. There was actually a program implemented that has reduced Baltimore's property taxes that people don't really know about. So we're celebrating progress. There's still a lot of work to be done. I'm very excited to hear a lot of the work that Mr. Brooks was speaking about earlier. Project Reach is very exciting. I'm excited to hear what Alice Kennedy as the acting commissioner has in store. There's a lot of good folks out there doing a lot of great work. But really, I want to get into what we can do now, how Live Baltimore helps our customers, our residents, anybody looking to move into the city. So we have a number of different programs. We have a Way to Stay program. This is specifically to help folks with families or thinking about raising a family in the school. For too long, there has been this myth that once you move into Baltimore and you decide you want to have a family, it's time to go out to the county. That is a huge myth. There are great schools throughout Baltimore City. The Way to Stay program that Kim Wiggins within our office runs is fantastic. It's a great way to help support resident retention. Our home ownership program, so classes just like these, falls under the home ownership program. Real estate industry, outreach and education, this is where I come in. This is my role, is trying to educate the real estate community about everything good going on in Baltimore and the number of incentives that people have to be able to help them overcome saving for a down payment. So we do data analysis for the housing market on a weekly and monthly basis for all of the neighborhoods throughout the city. We work with employers regarding the Live Near Your Work program, which I'm going to talk about. So I work and I reach out to any number of employers throughout the city that want to participate in this, and I'll explain what that is later on. Pizza in the Precinct is a really cool program where we go in for all of the new graduates of the police academy. We go in and we teach them and educate them on the incentives that are available for them as police officers, and we encourage them to live in these neighborhoods that they police. Nobody's really dove into that yet tonight, but that is a huge problem right now, is having folks on the police department not living in these communities. They don't know the people that they're policing. So we try as best as we can. We're only a staff of 8. To try and educate these new officers on what's available to them and where they can live. Our trolley tour events 3 times a year is a home buying event. I will explain that shortly. And then Baltimore's Birthday Bash. So this is a huge fundraising opportunity for us. Unfortunately, the pandemic altered our plans a little bit this year and we had to go virtual, but really this is a birthday party that we throw for Baltimore. We see roughly 600, 700, 800 people any given year. And it's just a really fun night with a lot of special guests. and just a lot of great people in the same room. So it was great to see it virtually and be able to convert it to a virtual event where we had the mayor on, Brandon Scott, Erica Bridgeford, a lot of the Oriole Bird was there. So we had a lot of great people at this, and it's a really great event that I can't wait to see if we can do it in person in 2021. So that's Live Baltimore. That's a really quick synopsis of what we do as a staff. Why I am here tonight is to tell everybody about what the Baltimore City homeownership incentives are, the BHIP program offered by the city. So before I talk about which programs there are really 5 things that everybody needs to know in order to be eligible. So homeownership counseling. Baltimore City has 13 approved counseling agencies, which provide webinars for first-time home buyers and one-on-one counseling sessions so that folks can earn a certificate to say that they've taken this class, they have been prepared for what it takes to buy a home. And once they have received that certificate, they can then become eligible for any of these incentive programs that I'm about to talk about. Another thing that you need to know about any program is that you need to live in the house as a primary residence. These programs are not for investors. We want to encourage that generational wealth, which has been missing in a lot of families. So these are only for primary residences, folks that intend to live in the house. Lastly, these are down payment assistance programs. They are any number of funds available, but you do, as a buyer, need to have a little bit of skin in the game. So we say that you must have at least $1,000 saved up of your own funds. That can actually come from family member. That can be a gift from a family member or a combination of family member. It can be a savings account that you have. So they just want to see, banks just want to see that you have at least $1,000 saved up of your own funds. Some of the programs, such as Live Near Your Work, some state programs as well, are going to be only available to certain employees. So if you work at Johns Hopkins, if you work at University of Maryland, Baltimore, there's over 100 different participating employers. So some as large as Johns Hopkins, some as small as, I'm blanking on one, Live Baltimore. We have 8 people and we participate. So there's plenty of opportunity there. And then lastly, some of these are restricted by household income levels. So not every program is going to require you to make under a certain amount of money, but there are a few that do. So some of these are open to anybody. Some of these require that you are underneath a certain income level. And I'm going to talk about those now. Actually, first, we're going to talk about the terminology. So I've said programs, I've said incentives, I've said grants, I've said down payment assistance programs. It's very important to understand what the difference is between all of these incentives. So most of these programs are forgivable loans. This means that if you live into the house as a primary residence for 5 years, any money that you received through this program will be forgiven. So 20% of this is forgiven annually. There's no monthly payments on it. There's no interest that gets accrued. So if you're living in the house for 5 years, you will never have to pay anything back. A number of the programs are what you call deferred loans. So if you have student loans, you know that a deferred loan means that maybe you don't have a payment on it right now, but eventually you will have to pay it. So with these, whichever ones are deferred loans, there are no monthly payments. There's no interest that's going to be accruing on it, but when it comes time for you to sell the house, if you refinance, if you move out and it no longer becomes your primary residence, you must pay back whatever you took to help buy the house. And the third option for any of these programs are going to be your grants. Grant is the best one you can get. There's no payments, there's no interest, it never needs to be repaid. It's basically just free money. So with those, I'm going to go into what the different programs are along with the eligibility requirements. The first one I'm going to speak about is our Buying into Baltimore / trolley tour incentive. So Buying into Baltimore is the name for our incentive. At Live Baltimore, we put on a trolley tour 3 times a year. The next one is coming up on September 26th. Write that down. September 26th is the next trolley tour. Folks that attend this event We're doing it virtually, so you can find all the information on our website, livebaltimore.com/events. You sign on to the virtual platform. It's very similar to this. And if you go through all the prerequisites, you will be eligible for a $5,000 forgivable loan, which is based on a lottery. Each time we hold this event, the trolley tour, it sees roughly anywhere between 400 and 600 people. Not all of those people are ready to buy a house. When we hold these events, we typically see anywhere between 40 and 50 people apply. And after each event, we will pull 20 names out of a hat. So do the math, 20 different incentives, 20 different winners based on 40 to 50 applications. So the odds are actually really good. There are no other restrictions to this $5,000. This can be used anywhere within the city limits. You do not have to be a first-time home buyer. So you can have other property. You can be moving up. This is open to anybody that attends the event and is able to apply. The catch is that you are not allowed to be under contract prior to the event. So if you're out there looking for houses right now, put a pause on it, wait till the event, and then you can sign off that day and sign a contract that day. So do not be under contract until the day of or after the event. That is our Buying into Baltimore incentive. That is the trolley tour, people call it. So again, 9/26, September 26th is a Saturday morning, is the next one. The next incentive I'm going to talk about is actually a federal program, but it is administered by the city. So it's called Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG for short. This is a simple one, $5,000 forgivable loan. This is one of the programs that has an income limit. So folks applying for this incentive, depending on their household income size, depending on their household size, their income cannot exceed what's called 80% of the AMI. AMI stands for Area Median Income. And I do have a chart for this, but it's kind of confusing in the condensed time that I have. I'll just say that if you're a family of 3 or less, 80% of the AMI, if you're a family of 3, is going to be roughly $60,000. So I have charts on our website for the exact amounts, but if you make less than $60,000 and you're a household of 3 people or less, you can qualify for this program. This is only open to first-time home buyers. So you can't have purchased a home in the last 3 years. You can't have had ownership of a home in the last 3 years. This is for first-time home buyers only. This program also requires something called a Housing Quality Standard, an HQS home inspection. So this is not going to be for your real fixer-uppers. This is looking for houses that are of pretty good quality. It's not like the roof is falling in and needs all of this work. The program is designed for a certain income level at a certain price point that, it's move-in ready. So there is an additional inspection required for this program that can add to the time of your mortgage application. Vacants to value. This is a great one. Baltimore City has, I think the official number is roughly 16,000 vacant homes. This is a program designed to alleviate some of that blight and all the while help folks get into a brand new home and achieve home ownership. So this is a $10,000 forgivable loan. That means 5 years living in the house, you never have to pay that $10,000 back again. This is available to first and second time home buyers. Doesn't matter if you're a first time buyer or not. There's 2 ways that you can actually use this. You can purchase and renovate an eligible vacant home. So by using a 203K or any other type of renovation mortgage, you'd be able to take a vacant home that needs a lot of work. You would make it your own. You'd be able to move right in, and then for your down payment, you would get $10,000 towards that. If that process seems a little daunting, which as a former loan officer, when I speak with first-time home buyers, they're often put off by what it takes to really renovate a house. It's stressful enough to try and buy a house right now, and when you add in renovations, it can be even more challenging. So What the Vacants to Value program has done is they've worked with certain developers. So developers can purchase any number of vacant homes. They can fix them up, make them move-in ready, and then any incoming buyer into that eligible home can utilize the $10,000 as a forgivable loan. So it's two ways you can go about it. This is a really, really good one to check out. The houses are located all throughout the city, and you can find them on DHCD's main website, dhcd.baltimorecity.gov. They have a map that you can use to find where an eligible house is. Baltimore City employees. This is the easiest one. If your paycheck says Mayor and City Council's Office of the City of Baltimore, you're eligible for this program as long as you've been an employee for at least 6 months. This is for your police officers, your firefighter, anybody that has that Mayor and City Council Office logo on their paycheck is eligible. It's a $5,000 forgivable loan. This is also open for quasi-city agencies as well. So the library, the Pratt Library, Baltimore Development Corporation, BOPA, Downtown Partnership, anybody that is, quasi-city agency is eligible for this one as well. Live near your work. This is the most popular program offered here. I had mentioned that there are over 100 participating employers, all the way from Johns Hopkins to a number of different companies throughout the city. So the way that this works is actually a match. So I'll use Live Baltimore as an example. As an employee of Live Baltimore, my company, Live Baltimore, would pay me $2,000 towards the purchase of a new home. The city would then match that $2,000 as well. So in total, I would get a $4,000 grant, which doesn't need to be paid back. I would get a $4,000 grant towards the purchase of my home, split between the city and Live Baltimore, my employer. Now, larger employers, Johns Hopkins, University of Maryland, they want even more. They want to encourage their employees to live well within the confines of where their campuses are. So they've actually increased their contribution, in some cases up to $15,000, $16,000 for their employees to live right around the campuses. So I'll go into that a little bit when I talk about combining these programs all together, so you can see how much money you can really get. But basically, this program is only eligible for certain employers and employees. If you work for a company within the city and they are not eligible for this program, please reach out to me. It is very simple to get signed up for this. It is a win, 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 win. Win for the city because you're moving in. Win for you because you get money. Win for the employer because that will keep you invested into their company. It's a huge benefit for their employees. So it's very simple to get added onto this list. You just have to reach out to me. I will provide all of my contact information when I'm done. So those were my city programs. This is a federal program. This is Federal Home Loan Bank of Atlanta. It has nothing to do with Atlanta. It's just a countrywide program where they really have 3 different options. So this is kind of like an add-on program to anything else I just talked about. They have a first-time homebuyer program where you can get up to $5,000 in the form of a forgivable loan. That is for first-time homebuyers. It's called the first-time homebuyer program. Community partners, very similar, except if you happen to be an eligible law enforcement officer, educator, firefighter, first responder, any healthcare workers, they will give you up to $7,500 instead of $5,000. So, and that one works if you're a second-time buyer as well, moving up. Veterans and any returning veterans. I get this a lot. If you are a veteran out there listening and you're looking into a VA loan, a veteran's loan, you're not required to put any money down. However, there are closing costs involved still. So this program will help you cover closing costs, and it never hurts to actually put more money down too. So anything available for you as a veteran, you're going to want to check this out. The catch for these programs, there are income limits. So it does change more periodically than the CDBG. So check the website and check with your mortgage lender at what the actual income restriction is for these programs. It's right around the 80% AMI mark, but that changes pretty frequently. This is also, and I should mention too, these are all not unlimited funds. There are a set number of incentives available every fiscal year. For this program, the Federal Home Loan Bank of Atlanta, it's a pool of money that's a federal pool of money that typically runs out towards October, November of each year, and it gets replenished. For these city programs that I went over, the city employee, vacants to value, they all have a set number of incentives available as well for the fiscal year, and some of them do run out towards May, June of each year, because that's the end of our fiscal year, but then they replenish in July. So it's important to realize how much is left for everybody. So what I just spoke about is a lot of info to take in. All of that can be found again on our website, livebaltimore.com. Those are all what I would consider add-on programs. So you get a normal mortgage and then you can add on any down payment assistance. There's also loan programs that you can take out specifically from the state of Maryland, the Maryland Mortgage Program. This has a number of products which I'll talk about, but just keep in mind that they also have household income limits. These ones are simple. It's a flat $121,560 if you are a 1 or a 2 person household or less. And then if you're 3 or more, you need to make under $141,820 in order to be eligible for these. Again, it's your primary residence. It's not for investments. Homeownership counseling is required prior to closing on the home. Everything I just talked about before was required prior to making an offer on a house. So it's in the very beginning. This program says you can do it before closing. I always say get your counseling done first, get it all out of the way. You'll be much more educated and much more prepared for the process of actually getting a loan. The beauty of Baltimore City is that this is considered a targeted area. So any first-time homebuyer requirements are waived. It also opens us up to a little more eligibility criteria as well. So these are the actual products. I'm going to talk quickly about some of these because they're not all down payment assistance related. The First-Time Advantage Direct, the Flex Direct are not they don't come with any down payment assistance. It's just a regular mortgage that you could take out like an FHA or a conventional loan. The First-Time Advantage 5,000 and the Flex 5,000, these are deferred loans. Everything I've talked about before was a forgivable loan, which again means that you don't have to pay anything back after 5 years. But these two that I've circled here, the Flex 5,000 and the First-Time Advantage 5,000, are deferred loans, which means that if you take that $5,000 down payment assistance that it's going to come with, you're going to have to pay that back at some point, whether you sell or refinance the house. These two, 3% loan, Flex 3% loan, is exactly what it sounds like. They're going to give you a loan that is equal to 3% of the purchase price, and that will essentially cover your down payment. It will help you get into the house, but you're going to need to pay that back. It is a loan. One of my favorites, though, are these grants, the Flex 3% grant, the Flex 4% grant, open to first and second-time home buyers. When I go back to that slide in the beginning, you remember that the grants were the gifts. This was free money. This is money that never needs to be repaid. So essentially, this program, the 3% grant and the 4% grant, will give you enough to cover your down payment in most cases that you'll never have to pay back. What's the catch? You're going to pay a slightly higher interest rate. So your monthly payments may be a little bit higher, but you're getting a huge chunk of money up front to cover your entire down payment. So if you're okay with maybe, $40 or $50 extra a month on your monthly payment, and that's comfortable for you, but you just can't save enough for that down payment, this is a program that is really going to help you. So that's Maryland Mortgage Program. I could do an entire class about the benefits of that, but I do not have a ton of time. So I'm going to keep moving on. I could do a whole class based on this program as well. If there's anybody listening on the call with student loans, this is the program you need to talk about. This is a mortgage that will actually come with enough money to pay off your student loans. There's two programs, the Smart Buy and the Smart Buy 2.0. So Smart Buy and Smart Buy 2.0. Smart Buy is open to any house in Maryland. Excuse me. Smart Buy, the original, is owned by the state of Maryland. So the house has to be owned by the state. There are not that many available. So I'm not going to talk too much about that one. Smart Buy 2.0 is open to any house in Maryland if you have, and I should change this. This is actually 30,000 now, as of I think just September 1st. That is changing. So it's not 40,000, it's $30,000 or less of student debt. They will pay, they will essentially give you a first mortgage for the house and then a second mortgage to cover up to $30,000 of student loan debt, which will then get paid off. So you're replacing your $30,000 of student loan debt with a forgivable second mortgage. So the key is that you buy this house using this program, they wipe clean your student loan debt, replace it with a second mortgage that gets forgiven if you live in the house for 5 years. That's probably the most confusing one that I go over, and I fully anticipate questions about this at the end of the panel. So I'm going to make sure that I leave enough time for everybody else. But any questions on that, feel free to type them in the chat at the end of the panel. But basically, student loans and you want them paid off, look into Maryland Smart Buy. Healthy Neighborhoods. Healthy Neighborhoods is an organization in, I believe it's on the east side in Highlandtown, and they are only working in certain neighborhoods. So Barclay, Lauraville, Pigtown, Remington, all of these neighborhoods that are deemed healthy, but just might need a little bit more investment. So what they do is they provide low interest loans with grants attached to them and help renovating properties. So these are renovation loans. You're going to be using M&T as your mortgage lender. You're going to save a ton of money on having no mortgage insurance. So Mr. Brooks said earlier on that you need 20% down to purchase a home. That is not necessarily true. You can purchase a home with less than 20% down. However, you're required to pay for mortgage insurance, which is very costly. So if you have anything less than 20% down, you need to pay for mortgage insurance. It's very costly. This particular program with Healthy Neighborhoods does not require that. You can put down 3%. There's no mortgage insurance. The rate is very, very affordable. And then they also have rehabilitation grants as well. So if you're looking into renovating a property, these are the folks that you want to speak with. And they are teaching a class, one of our 6 o'clock sessions coming up in October. So you can check them out. All right, I wanted to get to this one because I talked a lot about a number of different incentives in a very short amount of time. But this is the slide where it seems to kind of click for a lot of people just how much is out there. So this is a real customer. This is from a couple of years ago. This is Molly. Molly came to us. She came to our classes. She did counseling. She did everything she needed to do beforehand. She found a great house. And then she worked with one of our preferred lenders to actually help put all of this together. So here's kind of how it went. Molly attended our trolley tour. She was selected as a winner. So she got a $5,000 incentive for attending the trolley tour and winning the lottery. She worked, I believe it was for Johns Hopkins, I think. She worked for Johns Hopkins. She purchased in an area that had a $5,000 incentive from them. The income that she was making, her salary at the time, was less than what was required for CDBG. So she was able to get $5,000 from that because of her income. The house that she chose was actually eligible for vacants to value. So she was able to get $10,000 there. So that's 15, 20, that's $25,000 just from city incentives, just by knowing what's out there and working it to her advantage. So after all of that, she and her lender worked out that it made sense for her to also use one of the Maryland mortgage programs. So she was able to use the first time advantage $5,000. So she was able to get that. And then I didn't talk about these, the CPIP and the house keys, because I don't really have a lot of time, but this is additional money that you can get through the Maryland State program if you work for a certain preferred employer. It's just like Baltimore City's Live Near Your Work program, except it's called House Keys for Employees. That's this, and Smart Keys for Employees because she bought in Baltimore City. In total, we got Molly $36,000 towards her brand new house, which was enough for at least 20% down payment. I think the house was priced at $175 or something like that, which is way more than you need but she's going into a opportunity with a great amount of equity. This is what I do on a daily basis. I work with lenders and realtors and customers to help them figure out what they qualify for, what's out there for them. And, it can be a very daunting task. So that's why we're here. I can talk about it for 40 minutes or however long I've been talking, but really it's more check us out online, speak with us one-on-one, work with our lenders to help figure out what you qualify for and what's out there. So this is my contact information. Like I said, I will be up here answering questions when everybody else is done. Feel free to text me, 862-432-5348. Text me, call me, whatever. Email me anytime, any questions that you have. We are here to assist however we can to get you buying into Baltimore City. With that was a lot to go over. I appreciate that. I will turn it back over to the next panelist.
Thank you so much, Scott, for that plethora of information. At the Office of Equity and Civil Rights, we get calls from complaints to resources in the community. So we'll be happy to forward those types of calls to your office so that they can get all of the necessary help that they need with regards to home buying. Next on the panel, we have Mr. Terrell Williams. Mr. Williams was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, in a place called Cochran Gardens, which is a very violent community 1 mile from the Gateway Arch in downtown St. Louis. He attended college at the University of Kansas, later received a bachelor's degree in government public policy from the University of Baltimore, a master's in special in elementary education, and post-certification in administration and supervision from the College of Notre Dame of Maryland. A prior retail executive for 20 years and an educator in Baltimore City school system as a Pride coordinator, which is a structured program inside of the school system that helps the most violent students with emotional disabilities. He was also an adjunct professor at the Johns Hopkins University with Teach for America. He is currently an associate organizer with Build, Baltimoreans United in Leadership Development, and co-director of Turnaround Tuesdays, a job movement that seeks living wage employment for underemployed and returning citizens while developing civic leadership. I now introduce to you Mr. Terrell Williams. You're on, Mr. Williams.
Thank you so much, Ms. Curtis. And I don't know who did all those things, but I thank whoever did them. I want to say first, I've learned quite a bit in this evening, so I thank you all so much for that. I just want you to imagine for a moment, let's say that you've been born into poverty, you live in a large urban American city, and you happen to be Black or brown. Chances are you lived in a violent, drug-infested neighborhood. Housing abandonment rates sit somewhere between 20 and 50%. You know someone that has lead poisoning, maybe it's you, in my case, it is me. You live in a food desert, you have limited recreation or any affiliation with a mediating institution. Basically, you're living in isolation. Your elementary school resembles and performs like that of your neighborhood, complete chaos. The education building look much like your future possible or probable temporary apartment building. We call it jail. Drugs are everywhere. It's the center of your space. Police, you don't know whether to call them, to run from them, or stop because it could mean your life. And at the very vertex of all of this is the lack of opportunity for advancement. What I want to talk about today, if we're going to talk about home ownership, we've got to talk about two things deeply, and that is the opportunity to get a good quality job, and two, a great place that you can finally call home. These are the many stories that we hear at Turnaround Tuesday. I'm Terrell Williams. I'm the co-director of Turnaround Tuesday and also co-founder of this great movement that was created to really fill the void of helping people who are underemployed and people who've been formerly incarcerated to get good quality jobs. Turnaround Tuesday is a job movement of BUILD, Baltimore's United in Leadership Development, which was founded in 1977 as a way of going into communities and going into institutions to work with leaders to develop strategies to change the quality of life issues that they face every single day. BUILD is broad-based. It's a broad-based power organization. We're multiracial, we're multi-faith, and we are rooted in the community. Over the past 45 years, we've done things like the first Baltimore, I don't know if you know, but Baltimore was the first jurisdiction for a living wage. It came out of many people who were in our institutions working full-time jobs were also in our bread lines and food lines each week. And so we came up with this thing called the living wage. We also came up with College Bound as an answer to the many Black and brown youth that struggled in that first year to get to school, and we stayed with them for the whole 4 years. We developed Child First Authority, which we tried to create a line item for many, many parents that had latchkey kids, kids who had to be at home by themselves after school. And we found that many of those kids were getting hurt because like them, I didn't go straight home. I was a latchkey kid. And you could find me at 4 o'clock in the middle of the street or running down the street with my friends. And we found that many of those kids were getting hurt. And so now we have the largest after school program in Baltimore City and Child First. Our later things that we have done has been a winning of $1.2 billion for new school construction here in Baltimore. And if you have been in Baltimore over the last couple of years, you've seen beautiful new 21st century buildings going up across our city. The last two initiatives that we have launched, I think is a direct correlation to what we're talking about today. And that is the work we're doing around affordable home ownership. And as I said, Turnaround Tuesday, where we're building quality jobs. I think that we have to take a step back and understand if we're going to foster improved home ownership, we must think of it as rebuilding the market. We have got to come up with large-scale programs which involve the investments of public and private dollars. The housing or home ownership problem is an income and public policy problem. We need a sort of, I think, the Marshall Plan. We remember after World War II and the Western nations were falling, the US stepped in with a $12 billion investment. And we know 50, 60 years later, where those nations are today. Without that kind of large investment, I don't think America would be in the place that it is in today. And that was done by President Truman. He also did another thing that I think was beneficial, and it also hurt. He created what we call the Veterans Emergency Housing Plan in 1946, when all of our soldiers was coming back and they were looking for housing. And it was a way of really creating the suburbs. And the fortunate part is that our veterans were getting housing. The unfortunate part was Black and brown people could not follow. We could not get the advantage of that. In 3 years, this effort would build 2.5 million homes across our nation. Not only did he come up with this plan, he gave someone the responsibility of making sure that it happened in Wilson Wyatt, where he called him the housing expeditor, which means this person who had to create an urgency of creating home ownership. And I think that is what Black and brown people need today. We need an urgency around building new home ownership. We believe that the housing problem, again, is an income problem. People must make enough money in order to buy a home. If you remember, I heard someone earlier talk about Bethlehem Steel. What Bethlehem Steel did, it allowed poor Black and brown people to move from poverty into the middle class where we could buy a home. We could send our kids to school. We can get our kids educated because we believe that's the only way in America that you can truly build wealth. And so my discussion is not about building homes or building new home ownership. It really is about repairing the housing market that our government broke for many, many urban cities. When we thought about affordable housing, we thought we would go to someone that knew how or understood the issues of distressed neighborhoods. And we found that in Rebuild Metro, where they have a philosophy that suggests you have to know the neighborhood, understand the neighborhood, and build from strength. What does building from strength mean? It means if I'm in a community like Oliver in East Baltimore that had a 46% abandonment rate, and you have a great institution like Hopkins, the dilemma is, where do I start to build? And we believe the smart way to build is build at the strength, right off of Johns Hopkins footprint. Because the idea of someone buying a home in the middle of an abandoned community tremendously increases if you start at the level of power. And for Oliver, it was absolutely Johns Hopkins. So one, we have to find a developer that understands how to rebuild markets. Two, we have got to activate the community. We've got to go in the community, find, train, and develop the leaders that live there, that have stayed there, that have put their blood, sweat, and tears in those communities based on the histories that you've already heard. We've got to allow them to be the drivers. They have to meet with the Housing Commission. They should meet with the investors that are thinking about investing in their own communities. Three, with the development and training of those leaders, we have to look at how do we rebuild that community with an abandonment strategy. We chose to create a land development agreement, an agreement whereby the nonprofit would get a large portion of the properties so that we can rebuild those neighborhoods, not one house at a time, but 15 houses at a time. And a land development agreement with the city allows us to do that. We also have to look at safety in these communities. In many of these communities that have been abandoned, where they've also been filtrated with drugs and many, many other activities. So what we have to do is activate the community. Those leaders that are there, they need to meet with the majors of police departments. They need to meet with code enforcement. They need to meet with all the city leaders that have neglected them over the last 40, 50 years to build a relationship that says, if you don't answer to the needs of the community, there is a price to pay. Because now we are organized. We are no longer isolated in our own little spaces, in our own homes. The fourth thing that we have to do is figure out a strategy, as we've heard tonight, of how do we move renters to homeowners. I just bought my home, my first home 6 years ago. And for the first time in my life, I pulled equity out of my home. And I can't tell you what it meant for me to pull something that I feel I earned. And many people should have that feeling. The last thing I want to talk about as it pertains to development in distressed neighborhoods is our legacy residents, those people who have stayed there. Those people who have been there through the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and they've gone through all of those things that we have heard my fellow panelists discuss, the systemic things that kept them from reinvesting in their neighborhoods. They stayed. So I propose two things. We propose two things. That one, that there's a property tax freeze on those who have invested in those communities and have stayed in those communities for a lifetime, not only for their life, but also for their heirs' life. At some point, those people who have stayed for 40, 50 years need to know how it feels the way I feel to pull equity out of something that they own. The last thing around our legacy residents, I think that we should think about if the city can give tax incentives and subsidies to developers, they can help developers create strategies that help those people who stay fix up their homes. So all the homes in the community can look beautiful, nice, and refurbished. What would it mean to come up with a 1% equity fund for all of those legacy people who have stayed? If we want to create a greater home ownership for Black and Brown people, we must do what we did for white folk in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Find new strategies. We need a Marshall Plan across America led by people who have stayed and live in those neighborhoods. What we don't need is the piecemeal approach. And so as an organizer who have organized in community and have organized a new jobs movement, I can say to you that people are waiting for the teacher to come to their distressed neighborhoods. They're waiting for the developer. They're waiting for the trainer. I like to end with a story of one of the neighborhoods that I started work in about 6 years ago. And we'll call this person Shanae. I was in one of the neighborhood association meetings when I met Shanae. And I tell you, there were 4 people at the front of the meeting, and they were all had a median age of about 75 or so. There were about 15 people in the audience, and they were the homeowners in the neighborhood. And they were complaining about all the things that they had been asking for over the last 20, 25 years, including a roll-off to take care of the dumping. They wanted to meet with the city council member, and they were rebuffed because 2 of the leaders that were at the front said, "You all don't vote, so you can't meet with people." I couldn't understand those things, and I got more and more agitated as I listened to all these leaders in this room who are just asking for another opportunity to really, I believe, benefit from the investment that they had made 20 years prior. Shanae ran out. She got so upset she ran out. I ran after her. And I asked her about her aggravation, and she shared with me the first 2 or 3 minutes after she asked me, was I a crazy man? She asked me, why am I so interested in her? And I said, I am interested in you because I understand from your deliberations with the leaders inside of the neighborhood association that you were trying to get some things done and they were blocking you. They were actual barriers to investment in the community. And I began to work with Shanae. And I can say to you, we knocked on doors over the next 3 months. We knocked on over 150 doors. Shanae decided that this neighborhood association, after training and development with Bill, we sent her to a 3-day training, we sent her to a 10-day training, and we spent a lot of time with her and several other leaders that we found in the neighborhood. 3 months later, Shanae decided that she wanted a neighborhood association, a new one. And that is something I had never done. But I made a promise to her the day I met her, and that was, I said to her, what are you willing to do to improve your community? And she said, anything. And I told her, I'll do anything to make that happen. Fast forward 6 years, we have adopted over 17 lots that were nuisance lots that are now beautiful gardens. We have had weekly cleanups that turned to monthly cleanups, and now we joined the mayor's cleanup, and we won a few. We have partnered with our local school and brought in partnerships in the school because no one wants to buy a home where there's a school that's dysfunctional. We have created relationships with all city agencies across the board. We have created relationships with the major of the police department because we know no one will move into or buy a home in a violent community. And so we know that we have to be the drivers of safety, because in some cases, our officers, and we're not saying all of them, but some are not as interested in our communities as we are. We led a great demonstration, and we led a cleanup around the former Ambrose Kennedy Park, which we put 30,000 labor hours in that park, along with the Sixth Branch, which is a veterans organization, and ultimately won $1.5 million to revitalize the entire park. And it is a state-of-the-art park in the middle of the city. And we renamed that park. It was Ambrose Kennedy. It is now the new Henrietta Lacks Educational Park. We have brought $150 million in new investment to this new neighborhood, with anchoring St. Francis. There's only one great threat to all the great work that Shanae has been done, and it's the threat that we work on quite often today. And that is her fear that she'll be thrown out of her neighborhood in 10 years, because the best tax incentive that we have is a 10-year tax freeze. We need a lifetime tax freeze. We need a tax freeze for the heirs of people who have lived in these communities for 40, 50 years, where systems block them from earning the American dream. And the last thing that we need, and I think is vital, we need a Marshall Plan all across America, because Baltimore does not sit alone in these issues. I just left St. Louis yesterday, and that is my home. And I can tell you, St. Louis is more devastated than I last seen it a year ago. We have work to do, and I think we can do that work, but I think it's going to take public and private large investments driven by people who live in the community, and not people who want to piecemeal home ownership or piecemeal programs to help 1, 2, or 3 people. We need to help thousands of people, not single digits, not hundreds. We need thousands. And I tell you, I'm always ready to roll up my sleeve and get busy. So I thank you for the forum tonight. I am absolutely energized, and I am happy to say that 3 of our Turnaround Tuesday participants bought homes last year, because we know the only way to really buy a home and keep that home and get the equity out of that home is through a quality job. And we've got to push the industry to understand that renters lose every single month that they rent. It is homeowners and home ownership that is the belly of our great country. And until we do the big thing to really move this, because we created it, we're going to still have brown and Black people who has, what was the number? I think I wrote the number down. I think Mr. Brooks said to us that $5,000 of Black wealth compared to $170,000 of white wealth. I don't think that's good for America. And I think the first step is a quality job and a great home that I can call my own. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Terrell, for that backdrop of information and that historical content. I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation, and I especially enjoyed that personal piece. And I'm willing to bet that the efforts of the young woman's ability to organize in her community was mentored by you and your efforts and your unwavering support of community. So I'd like to just personally thank you for that. And we need to see that kind of effort across Baltimore City and, as you stated, across the nation. At this time, I'm going to introduce my coworker, Lou, who will give you an overview of the internal work of the Equity Office and how this whole event came about with regard to fair housing. So I'll introduce to you Ms. Lou Bangora.
Thank you, Glenda, for that introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Balu Bangora. You can call me Lou or Balu. I am the equity specialist for the city out of the Office of Equity and Civil Rights. And so in that role, I'm tasked with ensuring that the city's agencies are compliant with the Equity Assistance Program, which is Article 1, Subtitle 39 of Baltimore City Code. And what that code states is that each agency must have an equity coordinator, and each agency must complete an annual equity report, as well as create an equity action plan. And so in my role, I work with these equity coordinators to suffice the requirements of the ordinance. These equity coordinators are tasked with reviewing the policies and programs within their agencies to assess any potential threats and existing threats to equity, and to create new and innovative ways to address those threats and to reach those hard to reach communities. And so right now in the Office of Equity and Civil Rights, we are working on the development and the rollout of this initiative. And we are in the beginning stages. We are currently training the equity coordinators monthly. Every month we hold a 2-hour mini training session on different topics regarding equity, such as the social determinants of health, the determinants of health and youth justice, the vital signs, the history of inequity, disabilities and inequity, and so on and so forth. And so the original idea for this event was the equity and funding, and that was supposed to occur in March, but then COVID-19 happened. The actual date was March 23rd, and COVID-19 put us all on work from home order around March 16th. And so what that concept was in person, of course, and it was basically like a job fair, where individuals could go from each table to the different funding sources in Baltimore City, whether it was housing funding sources or revitalization, greening, small business ownership, just any type of funding you are seeking to invest in yourselves while also putting back into your communities and into your city. Unfortunately, COVID-19 did stop that, but this event was revamped from that to incorporate fair housing and to give constituents some information on fair housing and funding sources and resources. And so I'm glad that everyone that was able to tune in at some point, I'm very grateful that you all were able to tune in, very grateful to Glenda for organizing this event. And I look forward to any questions if there are any, and thank you.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm going to refer to the chat room. There was a question in the chat that was directed to Denise Dorsey, who will now, it will now be picked up by Mr. Terrell Williams. And that question is, why were African Americans left to live in the so-called ghettos and not other groups of immigrants?
I believe if you look at history, there are many, many groups throughout history that have been, as soon as a new group will arrive, they were ostracized. I think that because of a unique period after World War II, and there was such devastation, not only in Western nations, but also in our cities, I think somehow, as America has sort of always felt that, you know, darker skinned people are second-class citizens. And so the idea was, how do I make housing for our soldiers who are white, who are coming back, as a way of making sure that they had housing. And I don't think that the leaders wanted their white comrades to come back and live in those conditions, but they didn't consider the other citizens. And no other ethnic group was allowed to move with when the white people expanded, went into the suburbs. No other group went with them. So everybody was left behind.
Okay. Thank you for that. I have a question that either Scott or Terrell can answer. With regard to the Vacants to Value program, does that include commercial properties?
No, that is just for residential properties. There's other things for commercial properties, such as opportunity zone investments. It's a federal program that helps with tax abatement and stuff like that. But the vacancy value is just for residential properties.
Okay. Any other questions in the chat? And Terrell, I have a question for you. What are some of, can you give me more insight on the work that you're doing in the Johnson Square community?
Absolutely. Actually, the story comes from the Johnson Square community that we ended with. It is the work. I mean, we started probably 6 years ago in a community that was 51% abandoned. And I want to add that the Oliver community is now 8% abandoned. And so we've built over 300 homes there. And I think the important thing that I learned in doing this work is that it is so exciting when you activate the people who live there. So in the case of Shanae, I mean, Shanae started with one person, her, we involved her husband. And the next thing you know, we were having monthly meetings with 40 some people showing up every single month. With a core leadership of 18 people who work together all the time around different kinds of strategies. If you go to Johnson Square today, it looks very different than it looked 5 years ago. And I guarantee you in 5 years, it'll look very different. What we have to do, what I'm working with Shanae to do today and now, is make sure that this community does not, what happened to many communities does not happen to this community, and that is gentrification. We are doing everything that we can to safeguard the people who have stayed, because we believe it is those people that have held the community up. And the city and the state has to find ways to make them whole. And piecemealing just does not work. There has to be a comprehensive strategy. And that includes them.
Okay. I'm going to back up for a moment. If I could have each panelist who are still on the line to give their contact information so that we can follow up with participants who may have additional questions, and we can just provide them with your information. So if you would just state your name and your organization and any other contact information, that would be good.
My name is Morgan Rouse. I'm program manager at Innovative Housing Institute. My email address is mrouse@ihiusa.org. My desk number is 410-332-4118.
Thank you, Morgan. Next panelist.
I'll go next. Scott Seraphin with Live Baltimore. My email address is SSERA, F as in Frank, I, N as in Nancy, at livebaltimore.com. My phone number is 862-432-5348.
Thank you.
My email address is novella11@msn. That's N as in Nancy, O as in ostrich, V as in Victor, E as in egg, L as in Larry, L as in Larry, A as in apple, E as in egg, the number 11@msn.com. My phone number is 202-427-6876. And if you're looking for a quality job, give me a call.
Anyone else? Okay, there's another question in the chat, and that question is, what efforts are being implemented to market to middle and high middle class African Americans in Baltimore?
I think, Glenn, this might be to middle to lower income class. And some people who reached a certain level may not want to participate.
Okay. Scott, are there any programs within Live Baltimore that kind of market to the middle and higher class home buyers?
So we try and spread it out as equitably as possible. So the middle and higher end African American communities all get kind of lumped in with all of the other communities. We market the city as a whole. I will say that our trolley tour events, when we do host these in person, we tend to lean towards like Northeast, Southwest, and try and showcase all of those communities where people not necessarily would be driving through. So like if you're just coming through 83 or just coming in off of 95, we're not going to be hosting those events there. So our last in-person event was at Morgan State, actually, and we drove people around those communities up there, like Bel Air, Edison, all of that, before we were forced to go virtual for the last trolley tour in May. We were going to be at the Henderson Hopkins School over in East Baltimore. There's a community being built right now called Henderson Crossing, which is right across the street from that school. They're actually doing a lot of great things. I'm blanking on the name of the exact neighborhood right now, but it's right across the street from the Henderson Hopkins School. And they are building, I think it's 56 new homes, and they are all going to be eligible for the Vacants to Value program. So people are getting $10,000 off the bat just by buying one of those. It's a $17,000 live near your work area for Johns Hopkins. So if you work for Hopkins and you look at one of those homes, you're getting $27,000 right off the bat. So to answer the question specifically, we don't do anything, based on race. It's more just where that neighborhood stands in terms of the housing market specifically for that neighborhood. So if there's a really particularly distressed neighborhood, whether it's black, white, whatever it is, we can't market anything to that because there's no home ownership market to even market to. But the middle neighborhoods, the higher end neighborhoods, we don't discriminate through anything. It's just
there is the strategy for that, because you can have the parents who incomes are strong, middle to high income, who want to teach their children how to start from scratch. So there is a market for that. And we might need to do, an outreach for parents to talk to their children. Instead of you moving and paying $1,000, $1,200 for rent, we might want to target those parents who are already homeowners to pull the children in.
Mhm.
I would love to be able to offer financial education classes and homeownership education classes earlier on to people. It's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also too, we need to focus on not just two segments of the city. You have people who are in South Baltimore. You have Sharp Leadenhall, which was predominantly African American. Now it's called Federal Hill on both sides of the bridge. Federal Hill, and then when you cross Russell Street. And a lot of those people moved to Anne Arundel County. And then you have people who grew up and might have grew up in public housing. And then their parents moved them up to Emerson Village. And then when the parents acquired better positions, they moved them out to Catonsville. So we just need to move the net. But I really and truly believe that your parents is your first influencer. So we might need to reach out to the parents who are secure, who are well, who are stable, to say to our 31-year-olds, our 26-year-olds, listen, there are programs, you know, I think that's the avenue we need to pursue.
Right. And we would do that through, I do that through, we're not a counseling agency per se. There's a number of counseling agencies throughout the city that I help advertise for. Just try and spread the word about them as much as possible.
I like to take just a second. I think it is so vital that we really look at the issues that we have and the people who have those issues. You know, we're talking about equity here. And if we're talking about equity, we've got to look at Black folk. We've got to create strategies for Black folk because we're looking at equity, not equality, right? Everything was fine when things were the other way. Now we're trying to fix things. And if we're going to have to fix things, we got to target things. We can't say it's all for everybody because everybody is not in the hole together, right? We have to look, if we're going to look at strategies of home ownership, greater home ownership, we are saying that Black folk got $5,000 and white folk got $170,000. If we don't look at Black folks in a strategic way, then how do they ever get those benefits that they've been fighting for forever? This is supposed to be an equity conversation. This is about equity, which means if I am 3 feet tall and there's a 6-foot fence, I need more boxes than the 6-footer that needs 1 box. We've all seen that commercial. And so we've got to get away from now we want to be fair. It is time to be equitable. And it is time for us to have equitable conversations about education and all the other things that Black folk and brown folk have been fighting with. So we've got to get rid of this, we're going to be fair to everybody concept, because we haven't ever been fair to everybody.
Well, also
the word is being equitable. Let's look at one thing, let's look at another thing, and whatever thing needs the most help, that's where our money should go. That's where our investment should go, where there's a major problem. Not spread around to everybody so people that don't need the money get the money too.
I agree.
We didn't do that before, and we should not do it now.
I agree. And also too, not only equitable, we need to look at parity. We need to look at parity, and we know the challenges that we are up against, but we also know our children, not just African Americans. We know this world is not black and white. Now it is, but this world is green, and we need to look at parity. And a lot of my grandmother, your grandmother, everybody's grandmother, grandfather, when I spoke about Bethlehem Steel, we need to look at parity, and we need to teach our children, which we can. And the first person that a child listens to is their parents, and parents who have, who the kids think they made it. You know, our children think, oh, we made it. You know, we made it out the projects. But yes, there are programs and we're going to teach them.
Mhm.
But the people that children listen to are their parents and the parents that they trust. So, I mean, we can do it. With this panel, there are so many avenues. All we're asking our young people to do, our young working people, Build has an employment component. There are so many components through Live Baltimore. There is a responsibility on the parents too. Even though your child is 24, 26, listen, sit down. I'll go with you. So we all have to do our part. I'll reach out to those in my age bracket, you know, and we all just need to do our part.
Yeah.
But if mommy and daddy took us from public housing and then we rented a house in Emmons and Village and now we live in Owens Mills, we're a better person.
Okay, we have about 2 minutes left, and I'm just going to use this time to segue into or piggyback off of what Terrell said. It is about equity, and that provides the challenge for the partnership with our office to spread the message of equity and to do it in that manner. We need all the partnerships that we can get. We need the voices. We need to go into those areas that we normally don't go. So that's the challenge of my position with the Office of Equity, to identify those places and spaces where we can get to people to talk about what equity is, to bring them on board. The internal work is already being done. My job is to identify those external partners so that we can spread the message of equity and provide the resources necessary so that people know that equity is something that is beneficial for everybody, and it's something that just needs to be talked about, and we need to provide the education around that. With that being said, we're going to bring this segment to a close. If we have anything from you, Ms. Batts or Lou, to add to the closing of this this wonderful event.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, ladies. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I thank you all. Everyone on this panel provided, some diversified information that we all could use. We all could exchange information and bring that information to our respective organizations. And I, again, just thank you all for participating in this wonderful event.
Thank you all so much.
Thank
I've learned
you.
a lot.
Everybody
Thank
be
you.
safe. Be safe.
I've learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.